Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here tonight in front of the Morse Institute Library for a community read of Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. My name is Nikki Lefebvre. I'm the director of Natick Historical Society. We are an independent nonprofit that was founded in 1870, and we serve the community by inspiring connections to local history. We thrive on the support and generosity of our community members, so thank you all for being here and helping to make this happen. Just a few housekeeping notes. We aim to make this feel as safe as possible for our amazing readers who've joined us here tonight. So we just want to ask that when the readers are done, we don't enter the grassy space here in front of the, on my side of the sidewalk, so that they have a safe space to put their masks back on when they're done reading. So thank you for respecting that. And while you're listening, respecting each other's space, keep this socially distant for everybody here. I'm especially excited to be here tonight, and I want to thank Mass Humanities, the organization that inspires community reads of Douglass's speech like this one. Similar events are being held all across the Commonwealth, and they provide the resources and support to help make these events happen. So thank you to Mass Humanities. I also want to thank the many people and organizations in Natick who helped make this event happen, this particular event, by encouraging us to coordinate it in spite of the current conditions of pandemic, by helping to spread the word, and by helping us get connected to some really impressive teens who have joined us here tonight to read this speech. So thank you. A big thanks to Natick Pegasus for always being willing to partner with us and help make our programs more available. That has never been more important than it is tonight, so that people who don't feel comfortable joining in a public event can tune in when this reading airs on our local cable station. So thank you, Natick Pegasus. Thank you to Randy and Jeff who always make these things happen. And I especially want to thank the Morse Institute Library for really stepping up in the 11th hour and giving us the opportunity to hold this reading in a space that is central to Natick and important and visible in the community. So thank you to the Morse Institute Library. And finally, I am really honored to be here tonight in the presence of so many very impressive teens. It really takes a lot of courage to stand up and read powerful rhetoric that was written more than 150 years ago in 1852. So I applaud all of them for being here tonight. Thank you. When the speech is complete, I would like to recognize our readers by name. But for now, I would like to turn our attention to Professor Brenna Greer. She's joined us to help us set the stage for Douglass's speech tonight, and we're so appreciative that she's here. Professor Greer is an historian of race, gender, and culture in the 20th century United States who explores historical connections between capitalism, social movements, and visual culture. Her first book, Represented: The Black Image Makers Who Reimagined African American Citizenship, examines the historical circumstances that made the media representation of black citizenship good business in the post-World War II era. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, The Nation, Daily Mail, Enterprise and Society, and the Columbia Journalism Review. As an associate professor in the Department of History at Wellesley College, Greer teaches courses on World War II, the Cold War, the Black freedom struggle, consumerism and capitalism, and visual culture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Greer.
Hello. I was just saying that you all are the first people to see all 5'7" of me since March 13th. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. So I want to thank the Natick Historical Society for inviting me to participate this evening in what I see as a truly thoughtful and useful way to reflect on the past, but also to wrestle with our present. In several minutes, I will kick off this special student reading of Frederick Douglass's most famous and perhaps most provocative speech, What for the Slave is the 4th of July. And this is an oration that he delivered on July 5th, 1852 in Rochester, New York. And I should explain that he delivered it on the 5th because the 4th was a Sunday. And at the time of the address, Douglass was the most famous black person in the world due to his crusade for black freedom, the case for which he made repeatedly, and I would argue with unmatched reason and eloquence until his death at the turn of the century. Born in 1817 to an enslaved mother, Douglass, as I'm sure many of you know, was himself enslaved in Maryland until 1838 when he escaped from Baltimore to New York, a feat made possible by the aid of his soon-to-be wife, Anne Murray, but also his unique advantage as a highly literate enslaved person. And I just want to take a moment for a quick PSA to point to my continued use of the word enslaved rather than slave. As a matter of language, this might seem like a small distinction, but as a matter of meaning and power, it's very big, it's huge. Enslaved draws attention to the condition forced on millions of black people by slaveholders. Use of the word slave to label those millions of black people promotes an idea of them as naturally slavish and obscures the extraordinary systems necessary to keep them captive. So, back to Douglass. Settling in Massachusetts, Douglass joined the abolitionist movement, to which he was uniquely valuable because, as a formerly enslaved black man, he could testify to the horrors of slavery firsthand, and equally important, his remarkable intelligence and accomplishments put the lie to the notions of inferiority that were used to sanction slavery. As an abolitionist, Douglass traveled throughout the Northeast, lecturing on behalf of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, even stopping here in Natick in the spring of 1842, where he collected $3.66, which is approximately $111 today. By 1852, Douglass had obtained celebrity status, having traveled internationally to speak out against slavery. He was the world's most prominent abolition orator, and his standing as such is what compelled the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Sewing Society to invite him to speak in recognition of the nation's 76th Independence Day. Now, typically, 4th of July speeches are sentimental and triumphalist, and they celebrate the nation's revolutionary founding and democratic principles and emphasize unity. With What to the Slave is the 4th of July, Douglass went way off script. He used the occasion of Independence Day to highlight slavery as a grotesque and offensive contradiction to the tenets of liberty, justice, and equality that were enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. The speech is an indictment of white America and American democracy, and as you are about to hear, it is a master class in the use of irony. At the time that Douglass delivered this address, the nation was suffering from serious growing pains. The U.S. had recently triumphed in the Mexican-American War, which resulted in territorial gains that extended the nation's boundaries to the Pacific coast. And that expansion of territory ignited contests over the expansion of slavery. Ultimately, those contests culminated in a 5-year civil war that resulted in 750,000 deaths and the abolition of slavery. But in 1852, slavery was alive and extremely well, finding support in all 3 branches of the government. In fact, less than 2 years earlier, Congress had shored up the institution with the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, which mandated that formerly enslaved people be returned to slaveholders, even if they had made their way to a free state, as Douglass had. Anyone who assisted the enslaved or obstructed a slaveholder in reclaiming his property was subject to arrest and fines of up to $1,000, which is approximately $32,000 in today's dollars. Douglass credited the Fugitive Slave Act with nationalizing slavery because, as he said, it commanded all good citizens to engage in the hellish sport of hunting black men, women, and children. The Supreme Court also gave slavery a solid assist. The majority decision of the Dred Scott case in 1857 articulated but also codified Black people's subordinate position, determining that Blacks, quote, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and they might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for their benefit. This decision denied African Americans a path to citizenship, meaning even if free, like Douglass was by that point in time, they had no civil rights. What to the slave is the 4th of July brought into stark relief the paradoxical yet codependent relationship of U.S. democracy and Black unfreedom in the mid-19th century United States. As a historian, I value this speech for all it has to tell us about Douglass, slavery, abolitionism, Blackness, whiteness, citizenship, U.S. politics, and even oratory in the antebellum United States. As a woman of color and an American citizen, what strikes me most and saddens me more is just how well this speech has aged. Douglass gave this speech 168 years ago. Slavery was abolished 175 years ago. Yet, Black people's unfreedom, as well as that of many other people of color, remains a very real fact in the present-day United States. We stand here tonight socially distanced by a pandemic that has laid bare the fundamental and enduring inequities in U.S. society that make it such that African Americans have suffered a substantially higher unemployment rate, and they account for more than 25% of COVID-19 deaths, despite being only 13% of the population. We are also currently, and appropriately, in a state of upheaval following the casual and prolonged killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police in May. This particular act of police brutality has ignited a fire in millions the world over. But we must remember that George Floyd is one of a countless number of African Americans, men and women, cis and trans, who have fallen and will fall victim to the violence inherent to the racial prejudice and systemic racism that stems from this nation's history of slavery. So as you listen to these fine students read Douglass's words tonight, perhaps consider or reconsider the meaning of the 4th of July as a national holiday, and maybe ask yourself, what are we celebrating and who? So with that, I'm going to actually start the reading of this address, first delivered in 1852. What to the slave is the 4th of July? Imagine me as Frederick Douglass. Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way, for it is true that I have often had the privilege to speak in this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life, and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad that this is so. There is hope in this thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, the simple story is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although as considerable distance from your home imposed the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children. Such restraints, burdens, and limitations as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper. But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measure of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought to not be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign's indifference, coldness, and scorn.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we at this distance of time regard it. The timid and prudent of that day were of course shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all their terror and affrighted voicifications against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on and the country with it. And on the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that the dreadful idea with all of the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it, resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your father made good resolution. They succeeded, and to this day you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in our nation's history, the very ring bolt on the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Follow, citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of the Republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate the great deeds they with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did, the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all they concede that is a rare virtue that ought to be commanded respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for the country is a man who is not human nature and is despised. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortune, and the sacred honor and cause of this country.
They were peace men, but they preferred revolution to peaceful bondage, to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and the humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing movement and stretched away in length into the distant future. Fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, widely measuring with the terrible odds against them, your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God in His cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die and do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon here to speak today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful.
But such is not the case of the state. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, and prosperity, independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I mourn. To drag a man in feathers into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were in human mockery and a sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today, fellow citizens? Above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view, standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to the future, to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just. I fancy I hear some one of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But, I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue?
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls in the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that the slave is a man.
For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look to today, in the presence of Americans, to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself look ridiculous, and to offer an insult to your understanding. There's not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? It is that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken. There is blasphemy in that thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and I could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but it is fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer. A day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that, for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous now, and carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this Confederacy. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror which has been the foreign slave trade is contemplated. This trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense costs on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhumane traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by the Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable. Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers, armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves warily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a crisp snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on. Follow the drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. And never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from the scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but just a glance at the American slave trade, as it exists at this very moment in the United States.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is, today, in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States. The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. And by that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce, as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country, and to your God, that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no count was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage, and to all rights in the Republic, the rights of God included. For black men, there are neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime, and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient, under this hell-black enactment, to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe, and are bound, in deciding in the case of a man's liberty, to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowded-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and you pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bear your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that, of one blood, God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skin are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country bans your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base of pretense, and Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad, and it corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion and makes your name a hissing, and by a word to mocking earth. Be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of the American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of this age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time was such when could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of this strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Stream and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come when all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe.
At this point, I'd like to say the names of all of our readers, and when you hear your name, please stand. Laila Christian, Maya Martinez, Kevin Waba, Hildy Wicks, Alexa Solomon, Helen Zhao, Tia Perkins, Andy Meeker, Juliana Green, Marley Weist, Daniel Zogby, Gabe Proya, Ilir Kumi, Ellery Gleason Kaiser, and Arwen Gormley. Thank you to all of the readers. I'll say it again, it takes courage to stand up and read such powerful rhetoric. Please let this be the beginning of a conversation. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please check it out on Natick Pegasus. We'll share on Facebook and on our website when the program is ready to air. Thank you.